Hi, I'm Emily Snow. I'm a writer at TheCollector, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Karen Milbourne. Karen is the J. Sanford Miller Director at the Fralin Museum of Art at the University of Virginia. And today we are going to be talking about her role in promoting accessibility and diversity at the Fralin, both through the curation of a global variety of art, as well as through the museum's ambitious new digitization project. So, to start us off, Karen, I'd love for you to talk about your academic and professional background. You were appointed director at the Fralin in January of this year. And before that, among many other accomplishments, you spent 15 years as senior curator at the National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. So, what first inspired you to pursue a career in art and in museums? And how do your background and areas of expertise inform the work that you are doing today?
Well, thank you so much first for having me and for your great questions. I should actually clarify though that I was not senior curator for all 15 years. I was hired as a full curator and then rose to senior curator and acting head of knowledge production
Right.
um, when I left the Smithsonian to come here. But in terms of my career, I'm pretty unusual actually in that I have been doing nothing but working with artists since I was 18, 19 years old. So I created an independent major in African Studies and Studio Art at Bryn Mawr College and was actually able to study abroad at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka and worked with artists such as Ellen Atsui, who are really now quite well known. And Elle would let me actually sit in his studio and just watch him work when I was, just a kid. So when I came back to the States, I really wanted to continue working with artists and got an internship at what was then the Museum for African Art. It's now the Africa Center in New York City. And went to work before I even graduated there. Graduated from college, so I had to get permission actually to go home and get my diploma. And from there, went to the University of Iowa and got a PhD in African art history. And from there, taught at University of Kentucky, and then went to work at the Baltimore Museum of Art before the Smithsonian. But I've always worked with artists in all of those contexts. Even when I was at University of Kentucky, I curated two exhibitions with my students. So it's always been a real passion of mine. In terms of how, um, sorry, I apologize. I just wanted to make sure there was a part of the question too about like what it means today. Was that?
Yeah, what your background and your areas of expertise, how do those impact what you're doing today?
Sorry, thank you.
Of
Uh,
course.
I think that it affects everything that I do, and a lot of it is a mindset. I think that having had the gift of working with artists from the African continent for more than 20 years, it's meant that I see the world not always from a lens of Paris, London, and or Berlin and New York City. I mean, the center of the art world for me is more often Dakar or Cape Town or elsewhere on the continent. And when you have the opportunity to understand global traffic in that way, it really means that you see entanglement and the way that we all connect with one another in a very different way.
Absolutely. You bring such a fascinating and rich background and perspective clearly to all of your appointments over the years, but now as the director of the Fralin. So I want to talk about specifically the Fralin, whose stated mission is to encourage the spirit of curiosity and promote diversity of thought through art. And when you were announced as the new director, you mentioned in interviews that you particularly aim to bring a global variety of art to the Fralin. So, in your view, how do you believe global art fosters a better sense of diversity and inclusivity in American museums? And how have you seen this play out in your own professional and personal experience?
I think that's such an important question, and I don't think that there is one answer to that. I mean, one way that's sort of interesting is that I think ultimately when you're working with an art that's not American, although sometimes it is, I've worked with a lot of US based artists, Wangechi Mutu, Ayana V. Jackson, and I think that actually helps complicate how we think of what American is. But specifically, sometimes what I've done is not try and treat Africa's arts as different. So, one of the things I used to tell docents at different museums is substitute out the word Yoruba or African or whatever, and replace it with French. And if you wouldn't say that sentence that way, then don't say it. I think that sometimes what we have to do is simply think about how we create different vocabularies. And so a lot of what I've always tried to do is counter what I've called the language of difference. We have language that we use that means that we treat some people differently than we would our neighbors. And if you start thinking about how you're using words and you start using words in a more egalitarian fashion, I think it starts to change how we see one another. And I don't think it necessarily matters whether you're talking about African artists or Asian artists or Afghani artists or Appalachian artists. As soon as you start to be very conscious about how you use language differently in certain contexts, it becomes an equalizer in terms of trying to think about promoting different ways of thought. So that's one way, is it just allows for a more inclusive sort of sense of audience and language. But then in addition to that, I think that there are, it's fundamentally important to recognize that museums need to have more than one audience. And from my own perspective, museums should be a safe space to have complicated conversations. And you can't do that if you're only speaking to the same people all the time. And one of the ways to encourage different people to feel comfortable is for them to have the opportunity to see themselves within a museum. And this applies most definitely to race, but it also applies to neural differences. It applies to economic differences. How do you create a museum where somebody comes in and doesn't immediately feel like, oh, I've had to go through all of these layers and have my bag searched and I'm, and feel like they belong. And so like one of the things that I'm actually doing right now is we just submitted a grant. So it hasn't happened yet. Can't guarantee that it will, but we're working on it. But we're commissioning an artist to create a playground for the front of the museum. And so there's one artist in particular that I've worked with by the name of Temitayo Ogunbi. She is a Lagos-based artist, and she creates playgrounds specifically in the wake of uh, um, the murder of Trayvon Miller, because of how, as she says, not everybody has had the opportunity to run and play. And she wants running, playing to be something that is an option for everybody. But also one of the things that I think allows for people, grown-ups, children, to actually engage with one another is to play with one another. And
Mm-hmm.
so what if you have adults climbing around in front of a museum? How are they going to interact with one another differently? And how are people going to have the very first encounter they have with the museum be one where it's not don't touch, it's open up your imagination and touch. We are welcoming you. And then you come in the museum and we will talk about museum manners, but you've been welcomed in that way before you come in the door. And I think that's one of the most important ways about fostering inclusivity. And so, that's what I think happens when you have a more global perspective, is you don't see art as one thing. You start to see it as a series of opportunities.
That's such a beautiful notion, and I really appreciate your insights. I appreciate how your approach is very holistic, and ideally it wouldn't be disruptive, but it probably is disruptive to a more traditional approach to curating. And so to specifically talk more about the Fralin, you are currently hosting a touring exhibition that I understand your institution helped create, titled Madayan: 8 Decades of Aboriginal Australian Bark Painting from Yirrkala. And this exhibition draws heavily from the University of Virginia's own Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection. So can you talk about the significance of this particular collection and the exhibition, as well as your role in it?
Um, I should be honest that the Fralin didn't actually help create the exhibition. The exhibition was created at UVA and includes colleagues from the Department of Art History as well as from the Kluge-Ruhe itself. The
Okay,
Kluge-Ruhe
gotcha.
is a sister institution to the Fralin, and we are in the midst of actively partnering because we are going to join forces to form a new art center. And that's actually why I joined the Fralin, is to be a part of this process of building a new art center that combines the Fralin, which has a collection of more than 13,000 works of art from around the world, with the Kluge Ruhe, which is the largest center for Aboriginal, Australian, and Torres Islanders art outside of Australia. So it's an incredibly important collection. And so we are coming together to center Indigenous and other perspectives within museum spaces and combining with the performing arts. So we're going to be in the same building as theater, music, dance. And I think that that will really help bring to light the way in which art is lived. It is a living, active force. And so, that's really something that we hope to embrace. So that's something that we are doing together. But in terms of the Marianne exhibition, which is fantastic and everybody should see, and if you shouldn't have missed it at the Fralin, but if you do, you can still see it at the Asia Society in New York City starting in September. So we were able to bring that collection back to Charlottesville and host it at the Fralin Museum of Art and have our educators working alongside educators from Kluge Ruhe having, I've certainly given any number of tours. It has been something that has allowed us to deepen our partnership with one another. But I want to be clear that, Henry Scarrett, who is the professor of art history, and Margot Smith, who's the director of the Kluge Ruhe, they really were and most especially the Yolngu artists themselves were the drivers of that exhibition.
Right. And so along with the exhibition, I noticed that it comes with a corresponding online experience, and it allows viewers to interact with and further contextualize the art. So how do you think this resource, as someone who clearly is interested in diversifying the way people experience art in the museum, how does a resource like this impact the reach and the accessibility of the exhibition and the collection? And how do you envision using digital resources like this to enhance future exhibitions?
I think it's a fantastic website, and it's really interesting because I was earlier today trying to look up metrics to measure how many hits their websites had, and I couldn't access that information. So I'm going to actually give an example from an exhibition I did at the Smithsonian called Earth Matters, Land as Material in the Arts of Africa. But with that exhibition, we were able to trace that we had at least 4 times more visitors to the website than to the exhibition during the course of the exhibition. So we had about 250,000 bodies through the door, and we had over 1 million visits to the website. So if you think, and now the website 10 years later is still active and live, so it's still a resource that people go back to. So if you think about that, the web really becomes an incredibly powerful portal through which people can continue to engage with content over a longer duration. So I think that it's a really interesting space to be thinking more strategically rather than, oh, here are 6 objects from an exhibition, so you can get a resource and get the dates for when it's on view. How do we actually create the website as an extension of an exhibition? And so, something that I'm really excited to try and explore is having more video content on our website, interviews with artists, video tours of exhibition spaces, just, like 1 minute so you can see what it looks like. And then, do a lot more content. And it's a wonderful resource where you can start to think of music that's associated with different exhibitions. So like in the case of the Marianne, well, it's not, the songlines are songs, but they're also related to the visual. So, there are things like that where you can actually bring in sonic influences. You can bring in a number of different kinds of components that you might not get to have inside the gallery itself. And you can really think about it as that interaction that's going to continue beyond the duration of the show in the gallery.
I think that's incredible and represents such an exciting curatorial challenge and exciting potential to bring so many more audiences and a more diverse audience to different types of art. And so speaking of digital resources.
Actually, just on that point, that was the other thing I was going to say, like, I want everybody to come to Charlottesville and feel welcome, but if you can't, the website is something where you can access it in Australia, you can access it in Kampala, you can access it in, Warsaw. And I think that that's so important to remember that it becomes something that is true. You have to have access to a computer, but most people do have access to phones in some sort or to cyber cafes, and it becomes a real resource to allow people to see the information that they might not get to otherwise.
Right. And I think that's really incredible and something, yeah, very important for museums and other collections to invest time into to really make their art more accessible and more engaging for certain audiences. And so, on a similar note, since you assumed the role of director at the Fralin, the museum has added 10,000 objects to its online collection in just a few months, which is incredible. And this has expanded the viewable online offerings from 26% to 97% of the museum's permanent collection. So, as the new director of the institution, what made you choose to prioritize this digitization project?
So we're still digitizing the full collection in terms of images, but now everything is accessible online. And we also have language saying that it is still a work in progress. And so I think that's part of what's really important is not waiting to make the perfect the enemy of the good. We're never going to have a website where we have the best images, all the correct language. And in fact, one of the ways to get there is to put the content online so that, to the point that we were just making earlier, when you have readers in Australia and on the continent of Africa or in Europe or in Asia, they can now access our collection and say, actually, it should be called this. And did you know? And so it's a way to improve the information we have available. It's also in this moment, or any moment really, it's essential that we are transparent about what we have so that we can work with communities to determine how to take care of collections. Should they be returned? Should they be here as us as the stewards, but not necessarily the owners, where, we have a loan agreement with communities. There's all kinds of ways that we can figure out how to care for and disseminate information about works of art where that we don't have to necessarily be a sole owner or proprietor of the physical care of that object. And so the only way really to make sure that information is known about what resources are available here is to make sure everybody knows what resources are available here. And it is interesting because we've already started tracking some metrics. I don't have any data yet because it's too early, but it was really important to me to understand how often certain works of art get requested before and after this. So now faculty can actually see the whole of the collection, even if it's not photographed, they can read an artist's name and know that that artist is represented in the collection. And that becomes something that they can then teach to because they might not have known about it before because it wasn't available. Students can now write papers and realize, oh, I can go see that. And that's something that's really important for all of your audiences to realize is that we are a public institution. And even if it's not on view, you can request to come see it. Our collection is here because it is a resource that is intended to be shared. It is not meant to be stored away and inaccessible, and we provide access to our collection. So we want people to know what we have here so that it can be shared. So that's true whether it's the maker communities, whether it's the students, whether it's the faculty, whether it's somebody who's listening right now.
That's fantastic. And just the ripple effect of that online collection being available positively affecting so many visitors to the museum, art enthusiasts, but I especially am interested and appreciate that you touched on how the institution itself can benefit from putting that information out there and then essentially creating an opportunity to learn a lot more about what you have and how you can best curate and take care of it. So I think that just symbiotic, holistic, just relationship of learning and sharing is something that I hope every art institution will do and just open up the entire world to everybody. And one more question about this process, yeah, is as you've overseen the digitization, have you discovered a favorite piece in the Fralin's collection that otherwise might have gone overlooked?
That is a terrible, terrible question to ask any art historian because I'm always discovering new works of art and getting all excited about them. I mean, it's really fun because I don't know all 13 to 14,000 works of art in the collection. So I feel like every day I'm discovering a new work in the collection. So, I mean, some of what's exciting to me is sometimes there are works that actually still resonate on a flat screen, which is not ever the same thing as getting to see the work of art in person. But like Alice Faber, who's having a moment right now, where she's finally getting the recognition that she didn't receive in her time, like Helen Frankenthaler and other contemporaries. So like scrolling through, you can see some of her luminous canvases and the way that the color glows, even when it's a little tiny thumbnail.
Mm,
Or,
amazing.
I was scrolling earlier and I found um, it was listed as Caravaggio. And I was like, wait, what? We have a Caravaggio in our collection. And so then I clicked on it and it was an artist, in the style of Caravaggio. But again, for a teaching institution, I think that that is fundamentally important to see that back in the 17th century, the copies were being made. And how do we know what's real and what's fake? Or what do those words mean in terms of how we're applying them? Like as a teaching institution, to be able to have that kind of material where you can talk about how these words get applied and what they mean and what we're looking for and how we attribute meaning. I love that it might not be the most beautiful and important work of art, but that it's one that you can learn so much from.
That is so fantastic. What a treasure trove. And do you also feel like when you can access a massive collection online like this, just browse through absolutely everything removed from the context of being hung in museum walls or in an exhibition, where something might be displayed in a way that suggests hierarchy or importance? And so removing those elements, do you think that helps people discover new things that otherwise, again, might have gone overlooked?
I think meaning can be found in many ways, and I think it is important to see that range. I do think one of the things that hopefully will happen is that as we continue to build more content on the website, that part of what we will do is talk about why some works of art are, for want of a better word, better than others. I think it is particularly, I come from as we've discussed, a background that really is through the lens of Africa's art and artists, and a lot of visual literacy that we learn maybe in relationship to French impressionists here in the United States has not been transferred to understanding difference and quality in African contexts. So I do think it becomes really important to talk about quality in relationship to works of art, particularly those from places where you maybe don't have personal experience in the history of those objects, because there are humans that have just a creative vision and a technical competence that isn't shared by everybody. And there is something extraordinary there. And there is nothing more wonderful than when you get to be in the presence of a work of art that has that aura to it.
Absolutely.
So I love that, and I don't want to deny that, but the web isn't going to give you that intimacy of an experience with the physical work of art, but it becomes a space where you can discover range, and it becomes a place where you can exchange information, and hopefully it becomes an opportunity to then say it's worth it to me to go there and see that work of art, or I'm going to reach out to them and start having conversations so we can figure out how we can collaborate around thinking about these works of art differently.
That's so fantastic. And to wrap things up, I just have one final question for you, Karen, which is, are there any major projects on the horizon for you and the Fralin that you can talk about?
Well, as we just discussed, we're actually building a new building. So that's
Right.
probably the biggest project.
That is
But
big.
one of the things that actually I was working on over the weekend is what I'm calling Fralin commissions. So right now, the Fralin Museum of Art is a two-story building, and at its heart is this beautiful marble staircase. So you see it as you come in the entrance, and it takes you between the ground floor and then the temporary exhibitions upstairs. And so I've started a series where I am commissioning artists to transform that stairwell. So it's something that you will see as you come through the door. It's something that will make you want to go upstairs and see more of the museum. And it's something that we hope to continue in the new building as well, that this will be a series that people can look forward to for years to come.
That sounds incredibly exciting and beautiful. And I wish you and the Fralin all the best in making that happen.
And
And
we have an artist from Brazil and an artist from Benin who have already expressed interest in being to joining us and doing those projects.
that's exciting and clearly helps meet your goal to bring global art physically into the museum. That's exciting.
So thank you for asking.
Yeah, and thank you so much for interviewing with us at The Collector today. It's been such a pleasure to learn more about your work and get your insights. So thank you so much.
Thank you.